What happened to medieval crossbows once guns became important on the battlefield? Did they go away? No, they didn't. This is what they became. This is not a medieval crossbow. This is a post-medieval crossbow, which might be slightly surprising if you think about it, because crossbows are medieval and then guns came in and guns took over. Well, they didn't take over completely. This was what's called a latchet, or a latchet bow, or a latchet crossbow, which was used in the border reaver situation on the Anglo-Scottish border. Now, border reaving has been around since about the 13th century, and the height of it was probably around the 16th and 17th century. There were border reavers that were both Scottish and English. They were families, they knew each other. 1 day's ride north and 1 day's ride south roughly describes the area of the border reavers. This is a latchet crossbow made by Todd of Todd Stuff. Todd has a fantastic YouTube channel, you should have a look at that. He's demonstrated this, but I wanted to look at it in a bit more detail on horseback as well as on foot and see what it can do. It is a fairly simple mechanism. The prod here is about 280 pounds draw, but you use it with this lever. So it gives you roughly 5-to-1 mechanical advantage. If you set this up properly, it takes a little bit of time to set it up. It has a sear and a clip, and then this goes forward, and then you pull the string on to there, and then you pull it back. Now this is where the energy goes. I'm not going to do it fully because I don't want to dry fire it, but you pull it back, and then it clips down here and fastens here. If this clip should come undone, then the crossbow and this handle is going to ping up and probably break the mechanism or do some damage to somebody. It's quite beefy. It only has a short power stroke, but it doesn't really need to be anything more than that. The important thing here is it has a top trigger. It has a top trigger that allows you to shoot it one-handed. So you can ride your horse and you can shoot one-handed. You definitely need to load it two-handed, which I'm going to try on horseback because I don't know whether it's possible, but I think it's possible. And of course you aim it as best you can and shoot. It doesn't have a massive range, but it would certainly intimidate you if it was pointed at you, and if somebody was going to steal your cows, you'd probably think twice about having a go at somebody if this was pointed at you. The top trigger is interesting. Most crossbows have a trigger under here, and they work as, you know, a rifle or a pistol or whatever it might be with a trigger underneath. This has a trigger here, so it means you can do it one-handed, but also it's a bit of a safety feature perhaps, because if you're riding a horse, you have a loaded crossbow and it hits your leg or anything like that, it's not going to push the crossbow trigger up and shoot the crossbow. It requires you to sort of bash it on here. I'm not saying this is very safe, by the way, but it's not as dangerous as it would be if you had a loaded crossbow with a lower trigger mechanism, which would perhaps go off if you hit it by accident on something. So there's a possibility that it was quite useful for that. But why on earth, in the age of gunpowder, would you bother with a crossbow? I mean, this isn't necessarily a cheap weapon either. Although the bolts are fairly easy to make, and it can be shot many times. Once you've invested the money in the crossbow itself, you don't have to maintain it with gunpowder. So often in the British Isles, the weather, or the bad weather, plays such a pivotal role in historical events. Now, I think that this could be used quite effectively in the rain, in the mist, in the fog, in the damp, basically. Yes, I know that dampness does affect bowstrings a little bit, but it would still function. But gunpowder does not like the rain, it does not like the damp. If you were out reaving at night, which a lot of them did, there were night raids really across the border, along the border, to your neighbour's farm to steal his cattle. But at night it's often quite damp, as anybody that's gone camping knows, and things get damp. Gunpowder gets damp as well. Two things: gunpowder that's damp doesn't work very well. Gunpowder that's damp needs to be dried out or is ruined and is quite expensive to obtain. And gunpowder makes a lot of noise. So if you were going to aim a pistol at somebody and threaten them, they might know that chances are if they ran away you'd probably miss, because let's face it, early pistols are not very accurate. Modern pistols aren't that accurate, but early pistols are particularly inaccurate. They might be able to run away, but the noise of your pistol going off would alert everybody in the local area, so maybe your friends would come and rescue you, maybe not. But this thing doesn't make too much noise, so I think it has advantages for night fighting. And I do believe that special forces sometimes use crossbows today. Contemporary crossbows, obviously, with a lot of fiberglass and a lot of advanced mechanics, not like this. But they have a place in warfare, and night raiding is one of them. So this is potentially a good device to go sneaking about at night, threatening your neighbours and stealing their cattle. Right, how does it work? Well, you've got the string that is trapped by this hook here, and the bolt sits in there. The bolt then goes along here and sits in this little V-notch here, which actually doesn't really contain the bolt very well. I think if I was going to use this on horseback a lot, I'd want some kind of clip to hold the bolt in the right place. But the existing one that this is copied from a museum didn't have anything like that. Maybe it would have been added, or maybe the reason this is in a museum is that it didn't work very well and therefore was put in a museum. But I'd kind of want a clip, because the bolts can fall out quite easily, which is very annoying when you're on horseback. I suppose you've got spares, you load another one, but it's still a bit embarrassing when you're trying to threaten somebody and your bolt falls off your crossbow. There is a very simple mechanism which is not sprung here, which is just a sear that clips and stops this nut from rotating forwards to release the string. When this trigger is pulled back, that releases this piece, which pings back, and that slides forward, releasing the bow. To reload it, you have to push everything into the right place and then use this mechanical device to reload it again. I haven't shot it many times, but I'm told this takes roughly 10 seconds to shoot, to reload, reorganize and shoot again, which is actually quite fast for that period. Big crossbows take a lot longer than that. The mechanical medieval crossbows with the windlass or the goat's foot lever actually take longer than that to load. So this isn't exactly rapid fire by modern standards, but it's relatively rapid fire by post-medieval standards. Certainly as fast as a musket could be loaded, or a pistol indeed, possibly faster. I'm going to try loading this on horseback, but I'm actually not going to fully load it and use a bolt, because mixing horses and crossbows is a really bad idea. But I'm going to see whether I can use this mechanism when I'm mounted. I'm just going to try loading it, but I'm not going to put a bolt in it, because that would be asking for trouble, I think, with horses. It's going to be interesting to see. Nobody's actually done it as far as I'm aware. Obviously you can sit on a chair and try it to see what it's like, but I actually want to be holding a horse, controlling a horse. My guess is this is pretty awkward, and that you'll probably need to drop your reins or loop your reins around your wrist and hold it and use it two-handed while stationary, or maybe while trotting along. I suppose with others you could load it that way, but bouncing around on a horse is never a precision exercise when you're trying to do something other than ride. So we'll try that. But basically this was a medieval weapon that remained in use for quite a few hundred years later. And quite frankly, you could still use this, but of course cattle raiding these days in much of the world is not a dumb thing. Now I'm a bit spoiled because that mounting block makes getting on a horse very easy. Gossi is quite big. Gossamer is very different to what one might have expected of border horses. The border region was quite lawless, and therefore a lot of the horses would be likely to be the kind of workhorses, the good survivors, good doers. They don't require too much food to survive. They grow a good coat in the winter because they need to stay warm. Gossamer's probably completely wrong. She's quite a fine horse in her breeding. She's very tall, she's very showy. And one of the things about the Border Reivers is obviously what they were doing was very illegal. So if you got caught, you got hanged. And if you stole a really fancy horse that everybody recognised, it's obviously not your horse, it would be difficult to sell, and it would also make it clear to everybody that you nicked somebody's horse. So you probably want to avoid that. So your average horse that was indistinguishable, or relatively indistinguishable, and quite short, sort of ponies, light horsemen is what they were. They were very sure-footed, more likely to be native breeds, much shorter, easier to get on and off. Being dark, of course, as a horse is a difference, because in the night you want a dark horse as opposed to a white horse like Warlord. White horse would show off ridiculously much. But it's relatively easy to get on and off with a light crossbow like this. But what I've noticed is the crossbow itself is quite end heavy. So it wants to tip that way. But the design of it's such that you kind of cradle it here, roughly here where the mechanism is. And this bit kind of goes under your forearm or under your arm like this. You can ride along with it sort of wedged quite comfortably. You wouldn't obviously ride along with it loaded, I wouldn't have thought. But the reason I'm here is to try to see whether I can load this latchet on horseback. So what I think one would do is you just keep the reins in your hand. You don't need to actually do much. You take the weight of the... Good girl. Good girl. You take the weight of the crossbow, make sure your horse is nice and calm, and release it. Prepare everything in the right way. Now I'm not actually going to draw it back to full load because I don't want to dry fire it, and I'm certainly not going to put a bolt on when I'm riding a horse like this. That would be a little crazy. One day maybe, but not yet. So we're on now. So this is the bit that I thought might be difficult. I've got to pull this lever back on horseback. Yeah, that's completely doable, completely easy. I'm going to release it now and release it. So you could very easily load this on horseback and you could ride along. You could probably shoot it one-handed at anybody. You're not going to be very accurate if you're shooting like this, but it will be very intimidating. And one of the things I've noticed, now I'm trying it, is if I just move a little bit faster. Good girl. I could actually imagine galloping past and shooting this crossbow as the horse is moving. If you like, this could be used as a sort of drive-by crossbow shooting manner. You don't actually have to stop to use this. Of course, it would be very, very inaccurate. But if there were 3 or 4 of you, maybe 10 of you with crossbows, you potentially do quite a bit of damage if all of you shot and then galloped off up there, took some time to reload, charged over around and came back the other way, shooting again from the hip. I think it's actually very possible to use this close range missile weapon from horseback at speed. Yeah, that makes it slightly different. That means you could do hit and run attacks on a small farmstead. You could ride past yelling, shoot at them, ride off, load again, come back. That slightly changes how I think this might have been used, in my opinion. You can definitely use this one-handed from horseback at speed and still control your horse.